Viewpoints on the talk station FM 107 AM 1240. We were chatting yesterday with our guest Andy Jackson, and one of the topics that sort of touched on very briefly, and then more details appeared in a recent article appearing in the website nccivitas.org, is the topic of redistricting. And so with that, I wanted to give our guest Andy Jackson to a time to share with us what is, again, one of the issues percolating there in the legislature. Yesterday's program was the discussion about a bad bill that's being presented, and that having to do with the, if you will, the state's decision to not participate in the electoral college system, and then basically giving all of the votes to the electoral college votes to the popular vote winner in national elections. And I, as we discussed last night, this is a growing concern across the country. However, it doesn't at this point seem to have much of a future in North Carolina, at least at this point. But there is another topic, one that I think is pretty important for us in light of the fact that there have been some variety of lawsuits on the issue of how the legislature is constituted, that is the districting of our legislature, and arguments and challenges associated with gerrymandering. So the legislature is taking on this topic, and as a matter of fact, it's been confused as a result of a recent challenge in the state court system, and a judge, Judge Collins, determined that 2 of 4 amendments were unconstitutional because they were presented by an unconstitutionally created legislature. And the reason for that was the legislature, as it's currently designed, and its representatives are representing gerrymandered, or if you will, manufactured, I don't want to say synthetic, but manufactured districts that benefit the Republican or conservative movement. It is interesting, the other 2 amendments were not in dispute. I'm not really sure how you can parse that one, but okay. That is part of this whole issue of gerrymandering. So with that as a little bit of a background, and not a very articulate one, I would like to introduce Andy Jackson of the Civitas Institute. Andy, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us again, sir.
Thanks for the invitation.
Let's talk here about the whole issue of gerrymandering and the concerns associated with that. Historically, the winning party pretty much determines and I say the party in power, determines the layout of districts in a state. And this is done both from a congressional district as well as state and House, state Senate and state House districts. Am I correct on that so far?
Yes, that is true. It's all done in the General Assembly.
Okay. And of course, it's Eldridge Gerry is the first one who did this, and I'm not mistaken, it's Massachusetts, and he created his own district so that he could continue to serve in the what was then the Constitutional Congress. So now it became known as gerrymandering because, as I understand, he gave the name. The name came from him. Now we've seen this in other states. We've seen this for years. The legislature is being challenged on this. What next? There have been some, calls for a commission, an independent commission to lay out the districts in a state. My question is that possible?
It does look like we're getting some momentum towards that. The Republicans had called for redistricting commissions to be created back in the 2000s when Democrats controlled the legislature. And over the past several years, after Republicans took over, after the 2010 elections, having busted through Democratic gerrymanders of the legislative districts, since then the Democrats have been calling for a commission and Republicans have been resisting. So the two sides kind of flipped on that. But because of so much uncertainty about lawsuits, about how this next set of elections are to go, it seems like both sides are starting to lean towards supporting some kind of commission or other independent way of at least initially drawing districts.
Are there any states that currently use an independent type commission? And if so, have they done so with a modicum amount of complaints or disputes?
Well, just having a redistricting commission is not going to guarantee you're not going to have lawsuits. Arizona has a redistricting commission. It went through a couple of lawsuits, as did California's. So there are several states. I think we're up to a little over a dozen at this point, and it is growing. Probably the most famous ones are obviously California with their commission. Iowa is also held up as an exemplar of redistricting commissions, although it's a very square state, so it's pretty easy to draw those districts. And so those have been held up as a model for other states, and there has been a greater push for that for several reasons that state legislatures across the country are more worried about lawsuits just because the technology around redistricting has changed so much, and the technology of evaluating districts with really massive statistical programs has changed a lot. And so that's helping push things along in other states as well as North Carolina.
I do have to make note of the fact that the Democrats have controlled the layout or districts of North Carolina for almost 140 years. And that in 2010, that flipped in spite of the best efforts of the Democrat Party. And it just, as a result, Republicans took control of both the Senate and the House. Of course, they then, because every 10 years you have a census, and the districting takes place after each census, after every 10-year census, decennial census, diennial census. I'm sorry, is it decennial? Diennial. I get them confused, but be that as it is, every 10 years they do a new census and then they redraw the districts. So the question I have, and of course I want to make note of this, the original districts that the North Carolina legislature drew in 2010 required prior approval from the Justice Department. Not all counties, but anyhow, for argument's sake, the state of North Carolina required prior approval by the Justice Department. The Justice Department approved those districts, which has been an historic issue for many of the southern states. So now we're looking at, yet again, and North Carolina has attempted to redistrict or redesign the districts on 3 separate occasions. Am I correct on that number?
Yes, we've had a 2011, a 2015, and now a 2017 set of districts.
All right, and
so this would actually be the 4th time. When by North Carolina Constitution, you're only supposed to have one go, but as a result of lawsuits, we've had to go through this 4 times instead of the 1.
All right, so
or potentially 4 times, I should say.
Well, we're going up to the 2020 census anyhow, so it's probably timing on it works perfectly well. The question now goes: let's talk about the difference of the. You've got 2 resolutions, 2 House bills that are looking at creating a redistricting commission. I'm going to be cautious about using the word nonpartisan, but a redistricting commission, an independent redistricting. Well, I got to be cautious about that word too. But a redistricting commission. What are the 2 different bills? How are they differentiated?
Well, in a couple of ways. Well, first of all, we have both of them originating out of the State House. We have H69, and those that one calls for a creation of a body that would actually draw the districts. And so they would have a commission of 11 people, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, 3 unaffiliated. All of those are nominated by the heads of the Republican and Democratic parties in the House and the Senate, and then randomly selected by the state treasurer through some whatever random means they haven't specified in the bill. And they would actually draw the districts, have a series of meetings, and then present those districts to the state legislature to be voted on. And then there's a specific list of criteria. The other one, which is H140, would have a commission, but they wouldn't actually draw the district. The district would actually be drawn by the General Assembly's Legislative Service Office, which is a group of professionals there to help provide research and guidance to the General Assembly. And the function of the commission there would be basically to just hold public hearings and issue a report. But in both of those bills, borders would be drawn that would not take into consideration party registration or past voting history. And those would be presented, and the General Assembly would vote on those. Now, if the General Assembly rejects them, then there would be a second set of maps presented, and those could be amended by the General Assembly, which is basically put the ball back in the court of the General Assembly if they end up rejecting what the Commission offers them.
Which, of course, would open the door to yet other disputes, legal disputes.
Yes.
As you said a few moments ago, even in instances where there are independent, I'm using that word, commissions, they too have their maps have been disputed in courts as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Obviously, this is not a shall we say a perfect solution. Question for you: do any of these resolutions require a constitutional amendment, or are they a matter of just statute?
Well, they could. Both of them could stand just by statute because the General Assembly is tasked with redistricting, and so they can set up any rules they want for that. But H-140 would go further and it would actually propose an amendment to the Constitution that would put into the Constitution the rules that they have. We currently have rules like trying to respect county lines, trying to be, they must be contiguous. They have to be connected to each other. They can't have islands of districts. And this would add into that constitutional mandate not considering partisan data or racial data on there. Now, there might be some issues there with compliance with the Voting Rights Act. But we've had issues of that. And with the whenever we have a conflict with federal law and state law, we'll defer to federal law on those. So that might not work, but the partisanship they could cut out.
Now, under the case of the Voting Rights Act, I thought North Carolina had pretty much removed itself from scrutiny of that.
Well, it did. I'm trying to remember the year. I think it was, I want to say 2013. Pre-clearance had been cut out as it was written because it was based on formulas from the 1970s. And so the Supreme Court said that those formulas for determining which states or counties need pre-clearance and which do not need to be updated. So they basically told Congress, you need to go ahead and update this. But Congress, as of yet, hasn't done that. So that functionally has removed that requirement. But there is going to probably be a movement, probably in the not too distant future. I haven't seen a specific proposal yet where this will get updated in the Voting Rights Act sometime in the next few years. So we can't proceed under the assumption that we will never have to deal with pre-clearance again. So the state has to at least be prepared to deal with it, even if they specifically don't have to at the moment.
And one other aspect about pre-clearance, it was not for the entire state. It was just for certain counties in North Carolina, as I recall.
I believe so, and I would imagine those would be mostly down east and some of the urban ones.
Right. I'm not going to get into the details. I'm just remembering that from my long ago discussion on that issue. Again, Andy Jackson with us with the Civitas Institute. Andy, what is the future at this point for these two resolutions? First, I guess the first question is there a feeling of need on the part of the legislators, both Democrat and Republican, that we need to, attempt to come to a more, I don't want to say nonpartisan, but I'll use the term. I don't know that it's necessarily accurate, but an independent commission. Is there a feeling that is a thing that we need here in North Carolina?
Well, there certainly seems to be momentum in that direction. There are dozens of co-sponsors for these bills from both parties. There is some resistance among the Republican leadership at the moment, although it's not particularly strong. So it is looking like we are probably going to have something at this time, one way or another. But these are political decisions, right, that are being made, drawing districts, and the General Assembly is the political body, and it has, by the Constitution, by tradition, been the body that has drawn these districts. So it's kind of good that both of these bills do have that backstop there that kicks us back to the General Assembly if the commissions cannot get these things done. So it's not a complete takeover. It does still give the General Assembly some input in that. Mm-hmm. So I think that will kind of grease the wheels a bit and make it a little easier for this to get through, because the stakes aren't quite as high since potentially the General Assembly could get back involved.
It is interesting, and of course this is a matter of definition, I guess, as to whether or not this legislature is constitutional, as Judge Collins has complained that it is not. And so if this is a statute, is it a legal statute? It's just sort of in light of the disputes over the two of the amendments that were passed by the voters of North Carolina in the last election. Go ahead.
I was going to say, now the reason those were the only two struck down was because those were the only two that were challenged by the NAACP.
I know.
So if anybody has standing, if you're a taxpayer, in theory, you could challenge the budget. So this has really opened a can of worms. And it's just a matter of if anybody's willing to go ahead and just dig through that can of worms and see what actions the General Assembly took over the last 2 years that they don't like and they want to sue about.
Right. All right. I'm smiling because we could back ourselves up 4 years and eliminate all the actions that have been taken over the past 4 years. I think it would be fun to see that somebody attempt to do that. Andy, I do appreciate your time this afternoon. As we wrap it up with you today, the issue of the commissions, I guess the right term is commissions. Would it be instituted? Could it be instituted at the end of this year at the rate we're going, if in fact the legislature attempts this?
Yeah, they could. We could get it done during the long session this year, and I mean it wouldn't apply to the districts in the 2020 elections, but it would be there in time for redistricting for that first round after redistricting in 2022.
Right after
it could definitely be passed this year if things keep going like they're going now.
All right. Andy Jackson with us this afternoon. Andy, stay with me. I'll chat with you briefly off air. Do appreciate time as always. More to come with Andy. We're going to talk about other items later in the month because there's an upcoming lawsuit. Is there? Am I correct? In middle of March, Andy?
Yes. Common Cause versus Rucho going to the U.S. Supreme Court.
All right, we're going to talk about that another time. Stay with me. We'll start talking about the schedule on that one. You're listening to Viewpoints here on the Talk Station. And again, our thanks to Andy Jackson of the Civitas Institute, nccivitas.org.